We see these wines as being an important part of a joining of friends and people together, and we hope to think of these wines as bringing people together around the dinner table. In 2012, we opened a tasting room and restaurant so we could invite people to come and see our vineyards and experience the wines on site. Here we have local and seasonal organic food or ingredients that are combined with our biodynamic wines to capture the freshness of the season. We have a range of library stock of each wine so you can try the current release as we are today and then compare that to some of the aged stock that we have. This way we can convey and ensure wine drinkers that the wines will mature with grace and gain more complexity with time. So I must be sure that I don't sound like I do all the work myself. So we do have a team of people that work together to produce these wines. In the vineyard, we have a team of 8 to 10 people, and we work together right from pruning all the way through the growing season to harvest. Yeah, our goal is to apply the right timing in the vineyard so we can anticipate any of the challenges of the growing season and produce fruit that is certified organic and biodynamic. At harvest, which occurs from mid-March, we invite a team of harvesters to join us with hand picking. This is a very special time to bring people's different experiences and energy to our property, which is very invigorating for us. While we may feel weary after a long growing season, once we start to smell the aromas and flavors coming from fermentation at harvest, we are instantly reinvigorated and excited about the winemaking process. Each vintage is very different and varied, and we try to capture the character of each vintage in each wine that we produce. The 2024 harvest that we have just completed has been one with lower yields because of frost in spring. But after a further gentle spring, the vines recovered and moved into a dry, warm growing season. The fruit was harvested with very little disease pressure at optimal ripeness, so we are very excited about the flavors that are developing in the cellar at the moment. All the wines have now been pressed and this week are being transferred to barrel. So we move into one of our favorite times of the year. This is a time when we prepare for pruning, which starts in June. But in the meantime, we can take a brief holiday in Japan. Mm-hmm. So that really completes the overview of the wines that I have for today. But if there are anything to add or any questions, I would welcome them. We have a website that has got all the tasting notes and some information about our wine. And then if you want to capture day-to-day happenings, right, so at harvest time, we would move between the different vineyards depending on the ripeness of each of the individual blocks. So some parts of the Dam Steep vineyard, these parts here, we would harvest in mid-March. Then normally we would move to the Netherwood vineyard and harvest these blocks after the autumn equinox, which is March 23rd. And then we would move back to Dam Steep and harvest these blocks that have a different exposure and orientation to harvest these at the beginning of April. So we are looking at each individual block separately and looking at bringing out the best quality of each block. Right, grafted and ungrafted. Well, in Netherwood vineyard, this is 100% ungrafted, so we do not have really anything to compare on that site with ungrafted. At Damsteep we have ungrafted vines here and here, but we have grafted vines everywhere else. In general, we find the grafted vines have the best balance and the best resilience compared to ungrafted. We find some of the ungrafted vines have inconsistent success at flowering, leading to fruit set. So there is a bigger fluctuation in yields with the grafted vines. There are no known cases of phylloxera in North Canterbury at the moment, but it is a threat for the future. What was interesting for us in 2012 was planting the home Pinot Noir, where we had 6 different clones. These 6 clones all had the same rootstock, 3309, so we could very clearly see the different characters of the different clones. In the first 3 years of harvest, we found very little difference between the 6 clones, but with time, the differences became more apparent. This has meant as we get to know this younger vineyard, which is now has some maturity and we have some experience with it, we see big differences between the 6 clones, and that has affected our harvest decisions. So it has given us more and more layers of complexity and layers of flavour coming from that 2-hectare vineyard. So we do as much handwork in the vineyard as we can, so we can get the best out of each season. So ideally we're looking for very balanced vines where we would have a shoot of 10 to 12 leaves to ripen 2 clusters. We want to retain as much of the old leaves as we can because these leaves are bringing more flavour and more carbohydrates into the grapes. So if conditions permit, we would retain the basal leaves around the fruit zone and have dappled light coming through the canopy. Yeah, like just a little bit of shading, but not too much. We would remove the laterals around the fruit zone because these laterals bring in more water and sugar, but do not develop the right flavour that we want. However, in 2022 and 2023, we had the La Niña weather pattern where we had higher than normal humidity. This meant that at flowering, we needed to remove all the leaves around the fruit zone to get maximum ventilation and sun exposure to reduce the humidity around the fruit zone. This was a unique for us adjustment that we had to make in response to the conditions of that particular season. As I mentioned earlier, with organic and biodynamic farming, you really need to work with the season and anticipate any problems that you may have before they happen. So Netherwood Vineyard has got very small clusters produced from these old vines, and in some years when we bring them into the winery, they cannot be processed very easily. Sometimes these small precious clusters would go through the destemmer, and instead of the berries being taken off the stem, they would be cut up and we would damage some of the fruit composition. So because these vines have greater maturity and more lignified stems, we were comfortable including a higher proportion of stems into the fermentation of wine from Netherwood. As I mentioned, this type of fermentation actually increases the interberry fermentation, which maximizes fragrance, and you get a very soft tannin extracted from this type of fermentation. We still find, though, that there is some influence from the stem that in certain vintages can be a little bit distracting in the wine. So we are looking at decreasing the amount of whole clusters that we add in this wine, depending on the vintage. Yeah, previous vintages of Netherwood Pinot Noir have been up to 100% whole cluster. The 2020 is 50% whole cluster. Our goal is always to make the wine so you can see a very clear picture of the vineyard, not so much the winery. So, yes, I think the 4 regions in New Zealand do produce quite distinctly different flavours, and they're firstly reflected in the most northern variety, where you get the warmth, and in the south, the coolness there. So Martinborough, where some of the first Pinot Noirs in New Zealand were produced, is in the North Island, and you have a richness and a warmth to the Pinot Noirs that grow there. They have gravel soils and quite old vines, so they get a lovely purity of fruit with that richness of flavour. Marlborough is obviously our largest grape growing region, and they have some gravel soils and also clay soils. And for me, they have a lovely freshness, fragrance, red fruit, and brightness to the Pinot Noirs that grow in that region. Central Otago is quite continental. It's 100 kilometres from the ocean. The soil there is quite young, with mountains forming and schist soils. The light there is very bright and luminous, and as you walk through the vineyards in Central Otago, you'll see the schist soils and sand underfoot. And yes, for me, the wines have got a brightness of fragrance and a purity of fruit that is distinct in Central Otago. Yeah. However, when we return to North Canterbury again, and we see the old hills and soft light, we notice a difference in feeling and place in this region. As we walk through the vineyards, we notice underfoot there is a heavier soil where we have clay, sometimes limestone, and different texture to the soil in the vineyard. This is reflected in the wines that have got a subtlety to them, and they initially may have some more complex, more reserved flavours. Yeah, I think there is a weight and mouthfeel, a texture in the wine that is unique in North Canterbury, and this is balanced by a beautiful, fresh acidity that lingers and gives pronounced length in the wines. So while initially they may not show as much impact as some of the other regions, with time, I think you'll taste and see the complexity and the enduring flavours that give some intrigue to the wines there. I am very biased. Sometimes we use sulfur, but this one, the first one, the Pet Nat, has got 0 sulfur. So there's no additives in this wine except for biodynamic fruit and yeast. These wines here, wines 2 to 6, have no sulfur in the wine except just before bottling. So when the fruit comes into the vineyard, there is no additions to the juice. During maturation and élevage, there are no additions. It's just before bottling for wines that have got longer aging. In addition to the 3 single vineyard Pet Nats that we make, we also make a Chenin Blanc from the home vineyard and a Cabernet Franc from the home vineyard, and these wines have no sulfur. With Chenin Blanc, we find the luminous acidity helps preserve the wine and keep a freshness that protects the wine in the bottle. We bottle this wine directly from the barrel, so sometimes there is a little bit of sediment in the bottle which protects the wine from further oxidation. We encourage you to carefully decant this wine and leave the protective lees in the bottle. We make a small amount of Cabernet Franc that is grown with low yields and high concentration, and the tannins in this wine protect the wine from oxidation. Despite these two wines having zero additions or zero sulfur, we do find they have a good potential for aging in the bottle. And we pour these wines in our tasting room so we can compare the older vintages and show their ability to age. From these wines, we can learn more about sulfur's effect on wine, and it may change our approach to these wines in the future. Yeah, so this can only be done with the best ingredients. It's like a chef can only produce very pure, simple dishes with the best ingredients that's fresh and in good condition. This is why we do hand harvesting in our vineyard, and my time during vintage is spent in the vineyard with the picking team, making sure that we are selecting the right ingredients. We find the selection must be done in the vineyard because by the time it gets to the winery, it's too late. We don't want contaminated fruit being mixed in the same picking bin with our pristine fruit. Yeah, it's only with the best fruit that we're able to make wines in this very traditional way.